Today, the topic for this morning is from part 4 of the Spirit's book. It's called Hopes and Consolations. That's the 4th part of the Spirit's book. And in this part, we have 2 particular chapters. One is earthly joys and sorrows, and future joys and sorrows. But today, we are going to specifically focus on earthly joys and sorrows. And this is a very long chapter. It has a lot to it. So how can we turn a very long chapter in a 45-minute lecture? By going to the chapter and figuring out the main points and the main messages of Marcelo's Paiva is disconnected. Okay, good. So he gave me autonomy to move my own presentation. That's what it means. So what I did. So it's such a it's such a broad chapter that it talks about so many different things. We're going to touch on each item very briefly. In fact, pretty much all the items which you see here could be by themselves the topic of a lecture. Okay? So we're going to cover the topics. But one of the things about the Spirit's book when we are reading and studying the Spirit's book is this. What makes Allan Kardec put together certain topics under a chapter? So a lot of times when we are studying a particular topic in the book, are we making the connection between the topics, and are we thinking, why are all those topics? So you may hear a lot of lectures, for example, and I actually check YouTube, there's like tons of lectures on disappointments and broken affections. It's interesting to know where it is in the Spirit's book. It actually, in this part of the Spirit's book, that talk about earthly joys and sorrows. Because when you put into the perspective of the chapter, it makes more sense. It gains a broader meaning. And I like in particular this chapter because it speaks about something that everybody is after, which is happiness. Actually, this particular chapter of the Spirit's book tells us how can we feel joy in our life. So the very thing that we are after in this chapter, if you study it, if you read it, and that's something that we should be doing from time to time because the concepts you see are very challenging, but it is the chapter that's going to tell us, look, if you want to feel joy in your life, here's what you need to do. And so let's look at it. So first of all, let's just make a difference here, okay? There's a difference in between happiness and joy. So when you, for example, buy a new car or something that comes from outside happens to you that's positive, you're happy. Now, joy is a much deeper inner state and has nothing to do with the outside. It has to do with something that's happening within you. So just interesting that joy is true contentment that comes from internal factors. And it comes from the word rejoice. And it's cited, joy and rejoice are cited over 300 times in the Bible. Whereas the word happy, happiness, which means a state of well-being and contentment, it's only cited about 30 times in the Bible. And it means a fleeting type of feeling that depends on outside circumstances. So the chapter is called Earthly Joys. So it's not really referring to the happiness that I feel because, I don't know, I'm going to the beach or, you know, something outside that's really good, because that is something that you feel in the moment. Can you sustain it? Right? Can you sustain it? And what if you don't have the thing that gave you the particular sense of happiness? What if that's gone? Can you still experience joy? So we're talking about joy. So what I did is I pick up all the topics from this chapter. And I created a scheme that put everything together in one slide, almost in one slide, so I could have an overview of the entire chapter and try to get the meaning of each one of the topics and how one relates to the other. So the chapter starts telling us that this state of joy that we will experience on our lives is relative, right? So we, in this planet, are not going to be able to experience absolute joy. So if you're seeking to be joyful, like, I don't know, some of these Walt Disney characters, it's impossible. We're not in a fantasy world, we're in a real world. And the world where we find ourselves in is one of trials and expiations. So that's what the spirits tell us, okay? So in this world of trial and expiations, our joy is going to be relative because we are surrounded by challenges. And we have our own internal challenges. So it's not possible to be absolute joyful all the time. However, the spirits tell us that we can mitigate the amount of suffering in our lives by having spiritual sight, faith, and will. So if we have spiritual sight, if we can see life for what it is from a bigger perspective, then a lot of times things that seem to be enormous, they become small. Things that we give tremendous amount of importance become relatively unimportant. If we go back to the Gospel according to Spiritism, the 4 first chapters of the Gospel according to Spiritism is very interesting. It gives us 4 pillars that will set our minds to understand what comes after, which is the Sermon of the Mount. And so in those 4 chapters of the Gospel, we learn about the divine law. That's one law for the entire universe. We learn that there's many worlds in this universe, which makes us understand our lives from a much broader perspective. When we study in the Gospel the plurality of the worlds, what does that mean to us? We were having a discussion this week about the courses and reflecting about the knowledge. All right, so there's many planets inhabited by spirits. How does that change my life today? It changes because when I ask you, where are you from? You may say to me, I am from Miami. That's a very narrow perspective. But you can say, I'm from Florida, a little better. I am from the United States. I am from North America. I am from the Earth. I am from the Milky Galaxy. And God knows from where else you are. You are a being that belongs to the universe. You are a citizen of the universe. So when you have this spiritual sight and you have faith, you understand that there is a law that's absolutely perfect. Jesus said, I did not come to destroy the law. It's the beginning of the gospel. Meaning that the law is one, always be one, because it's a perfect, loving and just law. What happens is, as we progress, we have a better understanding of the law. So therefore, when we position ourselves from the spiritual side, then we are able to experience more joy because all the problems and difficulties become very relative, and hopefully we'll see that. So we can actually experience as much joy as possible in this life by investing in goodness. And it is important that we understand the law of God. So the more that we are actively involved in goodness and in loving actions in our lives, the more that we understand the law of God, which we learn in the Spirit's book as well, the greater understanding that we have of the nuances of the law, and this is something that we need to be constantly reading because we are so far from really understanding and applying the laws, then this is the way that we will mitigate our sufferings. And then Kardec asked the spirits. Kardec says, you know, but this concept of joy is so relative because some things might make Marcelo Paiva happy, and for me they are meaningless, and you know, with Leandro we all have different measures for what happiness is. Is there a common measurement that, you know, would apply to everyone? And the Spirit says, yes, there is. When it comes to material things, is to have what is necessary. So if you have what is necessary, are you on the roof? Do you have food on your table? Are you dressed? Did you have access to education? Do you have access to health? You got it. That's what you need, materially speaking, to be happy on this planet. And in terms of moral, what you need is faith and peace of mind. So, in order to be as happy as we can in our lifetimes, to experience this feeling of joy, this is what we need to do. We need to actively invest in goodness in our lives. We need to study over and over and try to practice over and over the law of God. We need to understand materially what is that we need. And I think the most important thing is, when it comes to the moral part, is peace of mind. Peace of mind does not mean that we have to be perfect. Peace of mind means that at the very end of the day, you're going to say to yourself, it wasn't perfect, but I gave my best. And at the end of the day, you said, yes, I committed this mistake again. Fine. I will do my best to do better tomorrow. You don't crucify yourself, but you have an active plan to continue to improve. So, if you are doing that, then you should rest your head on the pillow at the end of the day in peace. And this feeling of peace and this feeling of peace of mind is priceless. And because when our minds are in conflict, it drains our best energies. So a lot of times it's better to let go of things and stay in peace of mind than to nurture certain conflicts and hold on to the conflicts within ourselves. They drain our best energies and they really affect the quality of our lives. But again, it's a relative state of joy because we are in a place of trial and expiations, and there is incredible amount of suffering in our planet. So I wanted to put on the other side here all the reasons of suffering, but you're going to see that's a lot of stuff. So I have to open a new slide. But this is the summary of the chapter. You have on one side the things that give you happiness, and then on the other side, now the spirits and Kardec are going to go through reasons why we suffer. And for each one of them, the spirits are going to give Kardec answers that bring consolation. Because we are going to understand the reasons why we suffer in first place. And so the most powerful message for this chapter is that we have within ourselves the power to be happy and to be as happy as possible in this lifetime. So let's see. What makes us suffer? What makes us suffer?
We do. We do.
We do?
We make ourselves suffer.
All right.
Lack of peace of mind.
Bad choice.
Lack of peace of mind, but lack of peace of mind comes from what?
Laziness.
Laziness. I don't like this word. It's a little judgmental. Going back to your own comment.
I apply to myself, not to others.
Someone who is being lazy has inner reasons for being lazy. What that could be?
Wow. That's a broad question.
They're all for you to think. All right.
When you don't make the right choices.
I'm sorry?
When you don't make the right choices.
All right, so making the right choices. What tells us that we're doing a right choice?
Well, with conscious peace of mind that when you know that you're doing the right thing according to God's law.
Okay, according to God's laws. So the deviation from God's laws brings suffering to our lives. Right? Are there other things?
A lot of things.
All right, so let's see what the Spirit say. Okay, before that, so just reviewing here, earthly joys. Can humans enjoy completely happiness? No, because life has been given to them as either trial or expiation. We're here getting better. We're in a school. We are not in a summer camp. Right? It depends on them to mitigate their misfortunes and be as happy as possible. We did talk on that. Now, we need to practice the law of God, and understanding of future happiness help us. Life on earth, a momentary stopover at a dreadful end. I did talk about it. That is a statement that you find in the Spirit's book. Isn't that something? So the Spirit's book has statements and but it takes one to read carefully and to study. We will be starting new courses in our center in July with the purpose of opening new opportunities for us together to go to the Spirit's book, to go to the gospel and find these pearls that shift the perspective and help us to live better. So, life on earth, a momentary stopover at a dreadful end. There is something better waiting for us. Everything is going to pass. This is just a very short moment. So, hang on and keep doing your best at each day. Hold on to that hope that better days are coming. And better days mean future days and today and tomorrow and the next minute. Because if you really expand your view and understanding of life, things become relative. They will become relative and easier. Now, the little face became a little blue because sometimes that's how we feel, a little blue. So we do feel a little blue when we deviate from the law of God. That brings automatically some suffering, okay? But then the spirits also talk about suffering that's not caused by us. So if you going through a difficult situation, you look at it, and I got some competition today. Yeah. You look at it, and it's a good competition. You guys don't need to worry about it. And then you look at it, you review your own actions, you review your own choices, and you can't find a reason why you are going through that suffering. Well, that's part of being the world that we are. There will be times where there are circumstances that are really not caused by us. The spirits have a specific recipe for that. I'm going to bring it on in a minute. And then the spirits tell us, you know what? There is actually a real cause of suffering in our lives. People can really be said to be suffering if they lack the necessary for life and health. So from the spirit's perspective, true suffering really exists if you don't have those necessary things. If you don't have a roof, people who don't have food on the table to feed a mother that cannot feed their kids, that is a true reason for suffering. If that doesn't put things into perspective, I don't know what does, right? So, and if people don't have access to health, because we need our physical bodies, right? We need to have that source that can care and can help us to lead our life as healthily as possible. So if you lack that, you have a real reason for suffering. But there is more. So here's a small list, one part of it, because there is a second row. That the spirits talk to us, that things that cause us to suffer. So first one, material loss. Read the Spirit's book. It says there, I'm not making this up. So if someone is making $50,000 a month, and then life changes, and then next month got a new job, now you're making $10,000 a month. Yes, you have a real reason for suffering because now you cannot keep up with your social status. Because now you cannot buy the same type of things that you could buy before. These are not my words, they're in the book. You can no longer buy. So the spirits will tell you, you know what, when it comes to material loss, I'm going to give you a reference to think about. You can always choose to look up or to look down in life. So if you think that you had a real loss, what about the people who are living with $700 a month and have kids to feed? How does that make you feel? So they tell us when it comes to material things, our point of reference should be always the ones who are below us and never above us. There was actually a research in the University of Milwaukee where they look at people's level of satisfaction with life and they score them. Then they show them a number of pictures of people in really, really difficult situations, health-wise, financial-wise, social-wise, and then they gave them the same questionnaire. And actually their level of satisfaction raised significantly. Because what the research did is exactly what the spirits tell Kardec to do. All right, so it was like really interesting. So, and then when should we look up? We should look up when we want to look at the ones that are morally ahead of us for spiritual references. Those are the times that you look up. Otherwise, when it comes to material things, you should look down. Is that how we live? No. No. I myself gave an example a while back talking about my neighbor's car and saying that I wanted to have his car, right? And then, well, I didn't get the car, but let's say you would get the car. So what if he gets a better car? So then maybe you want to have that other car. Because ultimately, we want to look good. Ultimately, we want to have power, material power. Right? So it's really about having the car or what is the meaning associated. That's what we need to think about. What is the meaning associated to having certain things? Does that make us feel better about ourselves? Does that improve our sense of worth because we have more, we possess more? Because that's what really does. So much so that if you keep looking up, you're going to keep going after and creating a lot of times incredible sources of suffering in your life. Because a lot of times you give up on what's truly precious, family time, relationships time, to be after one thing, another, and so forth. Right? So the book talks, it's a lot of things, so I'm not going to be able to like talk about all of them so much. Misuse talent. So it refers to parents who force their kids to choose a specific career that goes against their nature, right? Why? A lot of times out of what? Pride. The kids are going, they projecting their success and things like that on their children, not respecting their true nature. And that brings to the kids a level of suffering. And a lot of times, people disregard their true talent because of ambition, and go after careers that are not fulfilling for them, creating for themselves reasons for suffering. So we can see like how there are many moments in our lives that the right choice, following your heart, understanding truly what your desire and your mission is important, because work should not be a burden, should be a place where we are accomplishing, where we are producing, where we are happy whenever possible. Lack of work. Sometimes we lack work and that is a reason for suffering, but the spirits tell us that a lot of times the problem is not that there's not work out there. The problem is that there's not the right work for us, for what we want to be, for the money that we want to make. So for those reasons, we should not experience hunger, because there is work. What there is also is tremendous amount of pride sometimes that will not allow us to say, look, this is an honorable type of work too. And if this is what I can do now, let me do that. And provide for yourself. The next thing is the spirits talk about this incredible number of suffering classes that is present in our world. And the spirits will say, well, what do you call suffering classes? Because all classes suffer. And don't be fooled. When you look at the rich, the wealthy, they have sometimes very deep sufferings that you just don't see. But they explain to us that given the quality of our planet and the quality of spirits that are in our planets, what we call the suffering social classes, the poor, are still predominant because of our needs, evolutionary and learning needs. They talk about the presence of evil's influence predominating, so there is not enough good in our planet. And the spirits will tell us that there is some good, but the good is very timid, whereas the evil, the wicked are very bold and loud, so it becomes more visible. Yesterday I spent the whole day in the Special Olympics, and I don't know if I'm getting old and more like getting close to Marcelo. Everything lately makes me cry. And it's like maybe mellowing, you know what I mean? But I'm like looking at these kids and looking at all those volunteers like involved in that Olympics, and those kids getting medals. And I'm talking about it and I feel like I'm gonna cry again. And those kids getting medals, so impaired sometimes, you know what I mean? And doing something so meaningful and so powerful. So there is a lot of good out there. We just need to be more outspoken, not to promote ourselves, but just to promote the possibilities. You know, there's so many possibilities, there's so many people doing good things, and it's just not spoken about enough, but it's there. And then moral suffering, that's an interesting one, because moral suffering, we always have the power to mitigate, to decrease our level of suffering. The spirits talk particularly about passions, and they cite envy and jealousy. And so they say that passions are torments. And they specifically speak about jealousy. So someone who is jealous is constantly worried, thinking about the other person. So in your days, while you could be with a free mind, producing, loving, when you put your head in the pillow, sleeping in peace, the mind tormented, persecuted by those thoughts, by those feelings. Same thing with ambition. You always worry about the things that you have, about losing. The more we have, the more we worry about losing what we have. And so you lose your peace of mind. The passions, they take over, and they affect the quality of our lives. So for all those things that are part of our life, they do bring some level of difficulty, some level of suffering, but to all of them, we have the power of mitigating and of dealing better with these situations so that our lives can be more joyful. But I wish that was the end of the list. Let's just go back and retouch some important concepts before I go to the second part of the list. So again, the spirits, when they talk about material possessions, the possession of the necessary, to compare, they recommend that we compare our station in life with the less fortunate when it comes to material things and rise our souls towards the infinite. Look up to God and look down every time we are feeling poor. In terms of moral suffering, they talk about the passions, envy, Envy is a difficult one to recognize. We all have envy. We envy people who are doing better than us. We envy success. We envy what people have. We envy things that people do and we don't. And so it's very much part of our psychology. Pride, jealousy, greed. And they use this statement: if you experience those, you have life in a continuous feverish state. So there's no peace. There's no harmony. There's no joy. The joy is stolen from you, by nobody else. Okay, so the Spirit says, what if my life is filled with misfortunes, regardless and independent of my correct actions? I did mention that there is this type of suffering that happens regardless, right? So you go back to the moral recommendations and you say, well, I'm very faithful and my conscience is okay. So then what's the solution? The solution is this: resign yourself, endure, and do not complain. Sorry, I wish I had a lighter recipe. But that's what the Spirit said in the Spirit's book. So I cannot alter the message. So there will be circumstances that we did not create, certain sufferings or difficulties. That's a great moment for us to testify our trust in God. Because everything in this planet that we live can become important material for our spiritual growth. But if we are complaining, that means that we are questioning. That means that there is a part of us that is not accepting. Okay? So there are times in life with only resignation and faith. Faith. Be faithful. I have a friend that says to me, she's a spiritist, and she says to me all the time, you have a much better, you relate a lot better to this fate in the future than I do. She's a spiritist, she's a speaker, and very involved, but she cannot relate to the future. She wants it now. And it brings suffering. It brings suffering because certain things you cannot have now. But you will have. You will have. A lot of times what's asked from us is a test of patience and faith. Do you trust? Do you believe? Truly believe? And the spirits and the whole gospel and the whole message of spiritism is that this is a very short stay in that horrible inn, right? Short. Put things into perspective. Better things are waiting for us. And we will experience some of those better states right here and right now if we truly, truly engage into these exercises that this chapter proposes to us. Alright, so but I said that there was a little bit more of suffering there. So there are all these topics in this chapter that I cannot cover today. I'm going to touch on them briefly again. Loss of loved ones, disappointments and broken affections. Each one of them, like I said, can be a lecture. Antipathetic unions, fear of death, disgust of life, and suicide, which is like 4 or 5 pages in these chapters. So let's just go over them like very briefly. Loss of loved ones. Should we mourn? Should we grieve if someone that we love passed away? Maybe we shouldn't. We know the person's alive. No. So we should definitely grieve. And the Spirit says that this cause of sorrow, it strikes both the rich and the poor. It comprises a trial, expiation, and a love for all. So for us, it's very difficult to lose someone. Okay? It's very difficult. The person is there, you talk to the person, depending on how close it is. You have the habit of, some of us, we call mother every Sunday, every day at this time. The person's gone. Now you cannot pick up the phone and call anymore, right? So it's not easy. It will be easier the more we become dematerialized, the more, the spirits tell us that in more advanced realms, we are in connection with the discarnate ones like much, much more easily. But right now it's not so easy, so yeah, there is some grief. They remind us that just be careful with inconsolable sorrow, because the spirits are sensitive to our memories and to our feelings. When you experience inconsolable sorrow, that means that you are lacking faith. That means that you are you're lacking faith. And a lot of times, this lack of faith and this lack of trust and this lack of understanding will actually not allow you to be with the person once you pass to the other side. Because that spirit who went ahead of you might be in a much higher plane, and you behind with your lack of faith and acceptance might stay a little behind. And they will receive your vibrations, and this will cause them grief. So sorrow, yes. Missing, yes. Longing, yes. But it can be inconsolable, right? It can be with despair. Because what about all the things that we know, all the things that we believe, right? All right, disappointment, broken affections, that's a big topic. Also a reason for suffering. So I'm going to ask you one question. What motivates you to do good? When you do good to someone, what is your true motivation?
Makes me feel good.
Huh?
Makes me feel good.
It makes you feel good? Right. And what if the person that you helped with a lot of sacrifice really disappoints you at some point and does not correspond to your expectations and removes the floor from under your foot? How do you feel? Well, but what was your motivation when you did good in first place?
Well, you're supposed to do not expect anything bad.
Exactly. So that's what the spirits tell us. Okay? So our motivation is rarely the good of other purely. It might be there to some extent. I agree, right? So Jake is having breakfast with us this morning, and he tells us that he helped someone at school, and Sherry always asked him, how that make you feel? And he said, happy. And we said, that's great, because that's what's all about. It's about giving and feeling good about giving. Because when you give, you realize that you actually have to give. The first person that benefits from giving is you. Because that love, you should rejoice. There's a reason for rejoicing. If you have to give and if you can give, rejoice. Because the love is in you, and the person who is unable to recognize that is in a place of suffering, right? So look what the spirits tell us. Let the good you have done be your reward in this world. World, it's missing the L, sorry. Ingratitude serves to test your persistence in doing good. So there's a whole part in the Spirit's book that talks about, should I become insensitive? Should I love less? Well, you're stealing from yourself the greatest treasure, the treasure of love, which brings true joy to our lives. Because ultimately, the more we love, the greater we feel about ourselves. It's wonderful to help. It's wonderful to give. And you've done that. Your reward is right there. You feel so happy about it. So we try to reinforce with him this morning that this is what it's all about. All right, then antipathetic unions. That's interesting. So, Prince Charming meets Cinderella, and ta-da! We love you, I love you, yada yada, right? And then 2 months later they get married because they are deeply in love with one another. And then 2 years later they hate each other. And so that's what these reasons for suffering in our lives are about. This topic. So the Spirit says that sometimes those unions are trials, but sometimes what happens are a lot of times unions of the body as opposed to unions of the soul. You marry that person's body. And the spirits go on to say, and this is in the Spirit's book, it's not enough to be enamored with someone who you suppose to be endowed with beautiful qualities. Because in 60 days, you're going to find tremendous qualities on that person. The person is in love. In love. So the person is going to only be showing their best side, right? And the good things. So it's not enough. It is only by living together that you can appreciate each other. Living with a person, giving it some time to get to know the person truly. So if you would give a little bit of time, and that's not always guaranteed, but it's better, because knowing one another is an ongoing process, it's a life process, right? So you continue to learn your partner through life. And then there's also the things that we are constantly changing, so new, it comes and goes on its own, has a life of its own. So it's a process, but we would save ourselves some suffering. A lot of unions take place when they were not meant to take place in first place. So we're seeing here how many things we can do to improve our lives and to experience more joy in our lives, right? Fear of death, and I'm just going to read this because I'm running out of time. Death does not inspire any fear in the righteous, because faith gives them certainty about the future. Hope beacons them with a better life, and charity, whose law they have practiced, gives them the assurance that in the world in which they will enter, they will not meet anyone whose encounter they must dread. So this is our plan for dying, right? Here's a plan for you, right? So you shouldn't be afraid. We should face it with hope. We are trying to be as good and charitable and loving as possible. And by the end of the day, there's no one who holds anything against us. Go ahead and die in peace, right? So I'm playing. So, but that's the idea, is that we try to be in peace with people around us. If we have done something and they have not forgiven us, it's their issue, as long as our heart is light and is in peace. That's what we can do. And in closing, more individuals who have raised themselves above the artificial needs created by the passions have, even in this world, pleasures unknown to the materialistic person. The moderation of their desires gives them calmness and serenity of spirit. Happy with the good they do, there are no disappointments, and vexations pass lightly over their souls without leaving any painful marks. So I think that this is a goal. If we can live our lives attentive to these artificial needs that we create, trying to live simply, trying to work in all the passions that we identify in our spirit, right? If we try to live with moderation, we will experience these states of calmness, of serenity, of peace. It is possible, I assure you. In the midst, it does not mean that life won't have problems. It does mean that you're not going to have challenges. But in the midst of the problems and the challenges, you are so in peace with yourself, with your own effort, with your choices, with your journey, that you can still feel that solid sense of joy within you. It's possible. Absolutely possible. And then with this spiritual sight and the faith and everything that we learn, all the ways in which we can mitigate our suffering, the troubles, the problems are going to come, they're going to pass by, but they're not going to be us big anymore. They're not going to mark us as deeply anymore. They're not going to drain us as deeply anymore, because we are going to deal much better with them. In summary, life is a blessing. You have the power to be as happy as possible in this world. Study, learn, meditate, love, be the sun of your life and the life of others. And that's the message of this chapter, that finishes with suicide and has 4 or 5 different pages on it, so I wouldn't have the time to address it, but we're not going to end this lecture that I'm focusing on the joy and the rejoice, talking about suicide. We're going to end this lecture talking about life, talking about the choice for living, because a lot of people, when they mention suicide, they mention it as a courageous act. But courage, true courage, is the courage to stay here, undergoing the trials, undergoing the challenges, making sometimes yourself little, working on humbleness, working on the acceptance that there is a higher power, submitting yourself to it, resigning to it. That is true courage. Thank you.